Robert Baratheon's beginnings were forged in the salt and wind of Storm's End, the ancestral seat of House Baratheon. Born in 262 A.C. to Lord Stephen Baratheon and Lady Cassana Estremont, Robert was the eldest of three brothers, Stannis and Renly, following behind. From an early age, he displayed the traits that would come to define him: towering physical strength, a booming laugh, and an infectious charm that could win over both soldiers and lords. Storm's End was a place of power and tradition, and Robert grew up under the watchful eye of a father who understood the responsibilities of nobility. His boyhood, though comfortable by Westerosi standards, was shaped by discipline and the expectation that one day he would lead. The Baratheons, after all, were not merely a house of warriors. They were kin to the Targaryens through Oris Baratheon, the bastard half-brother of Aegon the Conqueror. Robert's youth was filled with training at arms, hunting in the rain-lashed forests, and learning the codes of chivalry. It was here that his love for battle was first kindled. As the world of ice and fire notes, Robert was a giant of a boy, big-boned and big-hearted, with a laugh that could fill a hall and a blow that could fell a man grown. When Lord Stephen and Lady Cassana were lost at sea in 278 A.C., Robert, still a teenager, inherited Storm's End. The sudden weight of lordship forced him into early manhood, but fate had other plans. Soon after, he was sent to foster at the Eyrie under Lord John Arryn, alongside another young Lord Eddard Stark of Winterfell. This bond between Robert and Eddard was the seed of a friendship that would outlast kingdoms. They sparred, hunted, and trained together, forging a brotherhood of loyalty and mutual respect. Eddard's reserved nature balanced Robert's fiery temperament. Robert once said to Ned, as remembered in the Game of Thrones, "You were my brother, Ned. You know that. You were the only one who could put up with me." It was also in these years that Robert's famed skill with the warhammer became legendary. Where most knights favored the sword or lance, Robert preferred the crushing power of a heavy two-handed hammer, a weapon that suited his size and strength. By the time he was grown, he could swing it with such force that even a man in full plate armor would be shattered by a single blow. In the halls of the Eyrie, Robert's laughter was constant, but beneath the mirth, he was already a man of passions, quick to love, quick to anger, and quick to fight. His greatest passion of all was Lyanna Stark, Eddard's younger sister. Betrothed in a match that bound the Starks and Baratheons together, Robert saw her as the ideal of beauty and honor, though whether Lyanna returned his affections fully remains one of the lingering questions of Westerosi history. By the late 270s, the realm was under the rule of King Aerys II, the Mad King, whose erratic behavior and cruelty were becoming increasingly dangerous. Robert, still only in his late teens, seemed far removed from the madness of court, content to train, hunt, and prepare for his marriage to Lyanna. But the storm was already brewing. The spark came in 281 SE at the Great Tourney at Harrenhal, a gathering of the realm's most notable lords and knights. It was here that Prince Rhaegar Targaryen crowned Lyanna Stark as the Queen of Love and Beauty, instead of his own wife, Elia Martell. Though no one could yet foresee the blood to come, Robert took it as both an insult and a challenge. As the world of ice and fire recounts, those who knew, Robert spoke of his black fury when he heard that Lyanna had been crowned by another. The storm was already gathering in the prince's heart. Within a year, Rhaegar's actions would lead to Lyanna's disappearance, called an abduction by Robert and the Starks, and the realm would be plunged into war. Robert Baratheon, the laughing giant of Storm's End, would soon become the hammer that shattered the dragon's reign. The disappearance of Lyanna Stark in 282 AC was the stone that set off an avalanche. To Robert, it was no simple matter of politics or protocol. It was the abduction of the woman he loved. The betrothed he believed fated to be his queen. To her brother Brandon Stark, it was an insult that could not be borne. And to their father, Lord Rickard Stark, it was an injustice that demanded satisfaction. When Brandon and Rickard rode to King's Landing to demand Lyanna's return, they were met not with justice, but with fire. Aerys, too, the Mad King, had Brandon strangled before his father's eyes, while Lord Rickard was burned alive in his armor. The atrocity sent shockwaves across the realm, turning discontent into open rebellion. At the Eyrie, where Robert Baratheon and Eddard Stark fostered under Lord John Arryn, the king's demand for their heads was the breaking point. Aerys commanded that Robert and Ned be executed. John Arryn, father to neither but mentor to both, chose instead to raise the banners of the Vale in defiance. The storm had broken, and Robert's rebellion had begun. As the war unfolded, Robert Baratheon emerged as a leader unlike any other. His physical might and charisma made him a natural warlord, but it was his relentless drive, fueled by the loss of Lyanna, that made him unstoppable. Men followed him not just because he was their lord, but because he was a force of nature. As the world of ice and fire recalls, Robert was ever in the vanguard. His great hammer in hand, his laughter booming as loud as any war horn. The rebellion was not an easy path. At first, Robert found himself hunted, his house under threat. Storm's End, his ancestral stronghold, was besieged by royalist forces under Lord Mace Tyrell. Robert himself was forced into the field, gathering support from disaffected lords and inspiring men with both his bravery and his cause. He quickly became the symbol of resistance, the Storm Lord who would not bend or break. In one of his earliest battles, Robert proved both his courage and his resilience. At the Battle of Summerhall, he faced off against Lord Randall Tarley, one of the realm's most skilled commanders. Robert was wounded, his forces bloodied, but he survived, and survival was victory enough. For Robert, defeat on the battlefield was never final. It only hardened his resolve. Eddard Stark, quiet and steadfast, became his most trusted ally, commanding forces in the north and west. Together, they were the twin pillars of the rebellion, Robert the Hammer, Ned the Shield. Their friendship, born in youth, was now sealed in blood and fire. Robert's skill as a warrior was unmatched in his age. Taily spread of his warhammer, crushing knights and of his laughter, echoing across battlefields, even as men died around him. His presence inspired his men to fight harder, to believe that victory was not only possible but inevitable. As one veteran later recalled in A Clash of Kings, when Robert fought, he was the war itself. To follow him was to march in the shadow of a storm. The rebellion gained momentum with each passing month. Houses that had once bent the knee to the crown began to see Robert as the realm's best hope. His cause was not just a personal vendetta, it was cast as a fight against tyranny, against a king who burned his subjects alive and a crown prince who had dishonored a noble lady. But for Robert, beneath the speeches and the banners, it was always about Lyanna. His fury, his grief, and his love gave him strength, but they also blinded him to the deeper complexities of the conflict. To Robert, Rhaegar Targaryen was not a prince or a rival claimant. He was the thief who had stolen his bride. That hatred would soon come to define the rebellion's bloodiest hour. By 283 AEC, the rebellion had reached a climax. The fate of the realm would be decided not by treaties or sieges, but on the battlefield. And at the center of it all stood Robert Baratheon, warhammer in hand, ready to meet destiny. The Storm Lord had risen, and soon he would face the dragon himself. By the spring of 283 A, the Seven Kingdoms stood on a knife's edge. Robert Baratheon's rebellion had spread like wildfire, with lords great and small declaring for the Storm Lord. Yet victory was not assured. King Aerys II still commanded the loyalty of powerful houses, the Tyrells, the Red Wines, and parts of the royal court. But the heart of the royalist cause was Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, the crown prince who had vanished with Lyanna Stark and whose actions had lit the spark of war. It was at the crossing of the Trident River that destiny called both men to their final reckoning. The rebel host, commanded by Robert, awaited the crown prince's army, which marched north to crush the rebellion once and for all. Here on the muddy banks of the river, two visions for Westeros would clash. The dragon's heir, with his host of knights and loyalists, and the stormborn lord, who carried the hopes of rebels and the fury of a lost love. The battle began in a roar of steel and thunder. The riverbanks churned with mud and blood as cavalry charged and infantry clashed. The waters of the Trident ran red with the fallen. Amidst the chaos, Robert sought only one foe. As the world of ice and fire recounts, Robert cried out for Prince Rhaegar, seeking him across the field, his great hammer in hand. No other would do. No other mattered. Rhaegar Targaryen rode into battle clad in black armor, adorned with rubies that glittered like drops of blood. The sight of him inspired his men, for Rhaegar was no stranger to war. He was a skilled warrior, respected even by those who fought against him. Yet, where Robert was a storm, fierce and unrelenting, Rhaegar was measured, deliberate, like the song he was said to embody. The two finally met in the shallows of the river, beneath the gaze of thousands. Men would tell the tale for generations. Robert on his great destrier, warhammer raised high, his voice booming with fury. Rhaegar with his silver hair streaming behind him, lance poised, rubies glinting in the sunlight. Their duel was the stuff of legend. Rhaegar struck first, his lance piercing Robert's side and drawing blood. But Robert fought on, undaunted, swinging his hammer with earth-shaking force. As the tide of the battle surged around them, the two champions clashed again and again, each blow ringing out like thunder. At last Robert found his mark. With a mighty swing, he brought his warhammer crashing down upon Rhaegar's chest. The blow was so fierce that it shattered the prince's armor and sent a spray of rubies across the river, scattering like drops of blood upon the water. Rhaegar fell. His life ended in the shallows of the Trident, and with him died the hopes of House Targaryen. As a Game of Thrones recalls, Robert himself would speak of that moment with a mixture of pride and regret. I killed Rhaegar at the Trident. He died with a woman's name on his lips. The battle ended in a rout. With their prince slain, the royalist army broke and fled, leaving the rebels triumphant. The Trident was not merely a victory, it was the turning point of the war. In that single clash, Robert Baratheon proved himself not only the greatest warrior of his age, but the man who would wear the crown. Yet the cost was great. Robert himself had been grievously wounded in the duel, his side pierced and his strength tested. He survived only by the care of his companions, among them Eddard Stark, who remained ever faithful. But the victory also sealed Robert's legend. Songs would be sung of the rubies in the river, of the Storm Lord who felled the dragon's heir, and of the hammer blow that ended a dynasty. The Battle of the Trident was more than a clash of armies. It was the death of one world and the birth of another. The age of dragons had ended. The age of Robert Baratheon had begun. When the waters of the Trident ran red and Rhaegar Targaryen lay broken in the shallows, the course of the war was decided. The dragon's heir was dead, his rubies scattered across the riverbed like so many drops of blood, and the rebel banners flew victorious. Yet Robert Baratheon, though hailed as a hero, lay grievously wounded, carried from the field with a spear wound in his side. It was left to others, Eddard Stark, Jon Arryn, and their allies to press the advantage and march south towards King's Landing. The capital was in turmoil. King Aerys, too, the Mad King, had grown desperate. His paranoia and cruelty reached their zenith when he ordered wildfire caches to be set beneath the city, prepared to burn tens of thousands alive rather than surrender. But before such madness could be unleashed, the king was betrayed. Sir Jaime Lannister of the Kingsguard, sworn to protect him, slew heirs in the throne room. "Burn them all," the king had whispered as his last command. Jaime's sword ended both the man and the dynasty he served. By the time Eddard Stark reached King's Landing, the sack of the city was underway. Tywin Lannister, who had marched with the pretense of supporting the crown, turned cloak and delivered the city to Robert's cause, but at a terrible price. Aelia Martell, Rhaegar's wife, and their young children were butchered in their chambers by Sir Gregor Clegane and Sir Amory Lorch. It was this act that would forever sour Ned Stark's view of the Lannisters, even as Robert saw it as grim necessity. Robert himself, recovering from his wounds, was not present to witness the carnage. But when word reached him, he accepted the Lannisters' betrayal as a gift of victory. To Robert, Rhaegar's children were no innocents. They were dragons, must be destroyed lest they rise again. This hard truth, however, sat poorly with Eddard, who saw honor where Robert saw only vengeance. The war's end was sealed when Eddard rode beyond King's Landing to the Tower of Joy in Dorne. There, guarded by loyal Kingsguard knights, lay the secret that would haunt Robert's reign forever. For within the tower Eddard found his sister Lyanna, not the radiant bride Robert had dreamed of, but a girl on her deathbed, pale and fading. What passed between brother and sister in those final moments remains cloaked in mystery, but it is said Lyanna made Ned promise her something with her dying breath. Robert never knew the truth. To him, Lyanna had been stolen and slain by Rhaegar, the crime that justified his every blow, his every drop of blood spilled in rebellion. Her death confirmed the narrative he had built his fury upon, that Rhaegar had ruined them all, and that only Robert's hammer could have set things right. In a Game of Thrones, Robert's bitterness lingers even years later. In my dreams, I kill him every night. 1,000 deaths will still be less than he deserves. With Lyanna gone, Robert's crown was a hollow prize, yet he took it all the same. The realm acclaimed him king, not by blood right, for House Baratheon's ties to the Targaryens were thin, but by conquest. The Storm Lord who had risen in rebellion now sat the Iron Throne, his hammer exchanged for a scepter. The realm was weary, broken by years of war, but Robert was hailed as the hero of the age, young, strong, and victorious. He wed Cersei Lannister, sealing the alliance that had delivered him King's Landing. Though his heart remained chained to Lyanna's memory, he began his reign with feasts, hunts, and celebrations. Yet, even then, cracks appeared. Robert was a warrior, not a ruler. His victories were forged on the battlefield, not in the council chamber. Still, in those first months, all the realm could see was the Storm Lord triumphant. The dragons had been shattered. The Mad King was dead. A new dynasty had begun. But behind the crown's glitter, shadows stirred shadows of a love lost, of debts unpaid, and of a king who had traded glory for burdens he was never truly fit to bear. The rebellion was over. The war was won. But for Robert Baratheon, the greatest battles were behind him, and what lay ahead was not triumph, but decline. The storm had broken, leaving in its wake a crown too heavy for even the mightiest of men.